welcome to this conversation. I know that there have been many conversations, including the one that just ran a little late, but I'm very excited to be part of this conversation. Three amazing people that I get to talk to. And I know that introductions have happened, but I just want to do quick introductions from my end because when I was invited to do this conversation and I saw the speakers, I agreed readily. Firstly, because I've been a personal fan of Anita Dongre for a really long time. Apart from the fact that she's really made her own way in the industry that she works in, honestly, working women in India had nothing to wear until she showed up. Really, clothes that we're comfortable in, that makes us feel comfortable in our skin. So it's an honor to have this conversation with her. Soumya Rajan, again, conquering and making pathways in a space of finance, in investments, in banking. When she started off, it was a space that was not very open to women. And even now, even today, I meet young women who tell me that, oh, I'm not good at math, I don't understand finance. I allow somebody else, a male member of my family, to handle it. So it's so important to have role models who understand this. Also joining us, Hari Menon. He's the Director, India Country Office with the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. At a time when in India, we need so much focus on issues of gender. And the focus needs to constantly be changing based on what data is telling us. Coming out of the COVID year, more than ever, fewer women are working. More underage girls have been married off by their parents in rural India this year because they simply couldn't afford to feed them anymore. Girls have dropped out of school. Access or the lack of access to internet and touch screens have caused girls to actually completely lose their education this year. So much has changed. And so people working in that space need to understand the changing scenario as well. So given everything we've talked about, and when we talk about entrepreneurship and empowerment particularly, I'm really happy with the panel that the team has put together. Some pieces of information for our audience, that 17% of the GDP is the economic contribution of Indian women, which is less than half what it is around the world. This is according to the World Bank. A majority of Indian women work in the informal sector, which means that they don't have protection with the kind of jobs that we have with the formal sector. Let's also consider the idea of sexual harassment and what that means in the informal sector as well. Fundamentally, looking at the population and the fact that ideally women are half the population, even that we are not in this country because of sex-selective abortion, we're less than half. But our representation, our representation in all walks of life is very low. 11% in parliament and state assemblies, for example. That's nothing compared to the real population. But the real interesting question is, as far as entrepreneurship is concerned, 14% are women. 14%, which means 86% of the entrepreneurs in our country are men. And that should actually cause us to ask the questions of why. Why is it that fewer and fewer women are actually starting off on their own? Is it something we're telling women on a regular basis? Are women risk averse? Or do we not reach out and help? Is it difficult to raise funding? That's fundamentally what we're going to be talking about. So enough from me. Let me first quickly bring in the panelists. Let me start with Ms. Anita Dongre. Thank you so much for joining us. You came, from humble beginnings. You watched your mom actually stitch clothes by hand. That's where all of that basic stuff came from. But you started your journey with 2 sewing machines. And today you have, from what I understand, 2,500 people employed in your label. I want to know a little bit about that journey, but I also want to know what you believe were the challenges of doing this as a woman. And if you could, perhaps these three or four things could have been done differently, or if you were a man, were there some things that would have been easier for you?
Faye, I don't know. I think when I was a very young girl, I think what was very, very important to me is that I'm economically independent. We're 6, my mom had 6 of us. We are 3 sisters and then 3 brothers. So I have an elder sister and a younger sister. And my elder sister always wonders and asks me this, She said, how did you turn out different? What happened? You know, like she didn't have this burning desire to go out there and be economically empowered. She was a teacher for special children, and she was happy with that, and she was happy getting married, and she was happy being a homemaker. And she says, since you were very young, there was a restlessness in you. And I think, I've said this before, but when I was maybe in my teens, I noticed around me that though women played a very large share in managing homes and, worked equally hard from the kind of family I came in together with the men, it's still somehow like the men who held the power because they were the ones who were economically empowered. And I think that made me realize that the first thing that's very important to me is that I must stand on my own 2 feet and be financially independent, though I came from a family where that was not the case, where most young girls just got married at 19, 20. And did I face challenges? When I look back today, when I get asked these questions, because today it's becoming so important to encourage women. I think when those challenges did happen, where landlords didn't take me seriously when I rented a place because I was just this young girl, will I be able to pay the rent? When I was refused the store in India's first mall because I wasn't taken seriously because I was a woman. At that point of time, I don't even think that I saw those as gender issues. I was just so determined, and I was like, they're not taking me seriously. And I don't think it ever occurred to me, oh, they're not taking me seriously because I'm a woman. I should just get really annoyed and angry that they were not taking me seriously. And I just did what I had to do and used whatever came my way to make sure that I got what I wanted to succeed at work. Today, I think I take that same handicap that I had. I can recognize that, and when I see young girls, when I go into rural India, when I go into small towns, and I see the hunger in young girls to want to go out there and make it. And today I feel that I must be a catalyst for all those young women out there, because I just went ahead with my own determination and own perseverance. But sometimes I feel there are so many women out there who kind of just need that one person to help them and to make them believe that, yes, I'm on the right path and I can make this happen. So it's just been an interesting journey for me. But when I was very young, honestly, that time I didn't realize there was a gender bias. I was just so determined to do what I wanted to do.
Just when things were getting, when we start off as entrepreneurs, for some time it's below the radar. It's a small space. We're managing it on our own, but then it starts to hit a critical mass where you need to bring in someone to look after the finances. You need to bring in someone to look after marketing, to sales, and you're starting to build a team. At that point, did you feel overwhelmed that you're now running a business or something like that?
At one point, yes. I was very fortunate that I started as a creative person, and I pretty much managed everything when I started out. But a few years later, my brother did join me, and he had the head for numbers. So I was very fortunate, and I would say the success is us 3 siblings having taken all our core strengths and putting that together. My brother is somebody who is, I think, full of empathy for women. He thinks very, very differently. And I think we just made a great team, and that balanced it. So at no point of time did I feel too much of the strain, because we were actually 3 people running the business. And I think that really helped. And I must give my 2 siblings the credit too, and not take it entirely on my own.
That's such a lovely story to hear. I want to bring in Soumya ji, a completely different experience, 25 years of a career in banking. When you then decided to become an entrepreneur in 2011, you set up Waterfield Advisors. It's a multifamily office and an advisory firm. You've talked about, Soumya, the fact that your parents were salaried. And in a lot of households, the idea of leaving a salaried job and starting off on your own is just really surprising. People say, you know what, we're not really business people. It's a difficult ball game. Are you sure you want to do it? Was there a question that came up to you at that time?
So thank you, Faye. And just to give just a little bit more color and context, I think when one finished a degree, which I'd finished from Oxford and then came back to India, That time India was actually just opening up. It was 1993 at that time, and liberal reforms had just come in. There was this excitement around, working in a developed market. And as having parents who were in banking, the career choices invariably were either in banking, consulting, or joining the government. And those were the natural default choices. And because you had limited capital, you really never thought about entrepreneurship in any shape or form. So what ended up happening was, this career which started with Grinleys and Standard Chartered. But then also along the way, you get caught up in the rat race of just, building your career. Till I think it was a milestone of actually having turned 40 in many ways. And the fact that I'd also had a career which was reasonably fast tracked in banking, in Standard Chartered. And then suddenly at that age, I started asking myself that, is this really what I want to do for the rest of my life? Or do I want to really create a different kind of impact as compared to the impact that I've had within Standard Chartered? And then as an entrepreneur, you start thinking about the fact that what is the meaning for what is your larger professional career? So at the same time, because I was heading the private bank of Standard Chartered, there was actually a business opportunity. And the business opportunity was that the wealth management space was quite broken in many ways. And there was a huge conflict of interest in the way clients were advised. So it was almost like the convergence of three things, which was all happening at the same time. One, a milestone birthday, which had actually happened, and a rethinking on the purpose and meaning of your existence. The second was a business opportunity, which was staring you at the face. And the third was really the fact that in some ways, when you're also working in global MNCs, and I'm sure many women may have encountered this, the big jobs are actually after a point not in India. So the question is that those career choices is what women also have to make, because you can't necessarily leave your family and home and say that, look, I'm just going to relocate. And I had actually done that with Standard Chartered, where I relocated to Singapore briefly, and my husband continued to be in India. So once you've gone through all that, it just felt that, look, there is a convergence of these three which then come in, and therefore it was important to look at entrepreneurship. And I've never regretted that from the day that I started. Obviously, entrepreneurship is a very difficult journey. Most people jump into it not quite knowing always what it entails. But at the end of the day, if I look back upon it now, the ability to create impact, the ability to have purpose in terms of what you're doing is very meaningful in terms of as a career choice. The flip side, of course, is that when you initially start, you don't have the financial resources, and that becomes quite difficult to adjust to. And the other is really when you're making a shift from a corporate professional to entrepreneurship, you're losing in some ways the corporate identity. And that for a lot of people can take a little time to actually adjust. And it certainly took me time to recognize that it wasn't really the corporate image that I was looking at portraying. It was really my own personal brand and personal image.
I do want to ask you this, though, also slightly selfishly as an entrepreneur myself. Since you're in the space at this point, is it more challenging for women starting businesses to raise funding? And if it is, if the data shows that it is, why is that so?
So I think if again, going back to some data points here, if you were to look at the kind of enterprises which are there, which are owned by women, only 1% of them, of women-owned enterprises, actually have revenue which is being generated, which is more than 50 lakhs a year, and employ more than 10 people. Now, if you look at that, it means that while these entrepreneurial women have made the shift in terms of financial independence, they're not able to scale. So if they're not able to scale, one of those hindrances is a significant hindrance is really the access to capital and the access to credit. Again, another very interesting statistic is that women entrepreneurs who are involved in agriculture are close to about 30% of the enterprises which are created. Yet only 2% of farmland is actually owned by women. So they have clearly low savings, just fundamentally in terms of resources. And the other is really having access to real assets, which they could then use if they had to go to a bank in order to get a bank loan. And here, I think what we're looking at is that for women entrepreneurs, there's the issue of financial independence and there is the issue of financial literacy. And I think literacy is perhaps actually the bigger issue which needs to be tackled, which is women don't know, first of all, are governments, banks, are there schemes that allow them to access credit? So where do they go if they need to get access and information to this? The second is, even if they do know what those products are, how do they kind of read through and understand what is the right financing tool or instrument for them? Because I think what women end up doing is that they're very good in terms of understanding the business idea. But I've seen even clients of ours that we advise that the moment it comes to a discussion around if it's an acquisition or a merger or anything which is remotely finance related, they want to quickly draw someone else into that conversation. So I think the ability for women to better understand what is available to them when they access credit, I think that is going to be an extremely important area that we address if we're going to see women entrepreneurs scale. Because ultimately, it's only when you're able to scale that business that you have all the ripple effects that come through in terms of job creation, in terms of greater financial independence, making just better choices. So that would be, I think, financial literacy for me would be a very big area that we probably need to address. And just one last point in terms of just women who want to scale businesses and end up talking to, let's say, private equity firms or venture funds or otherwise, you only have 2% of women-owned businesses that are actually funded by a venture or by private equity. And many of the constraints come through because of networks, not knowing how to pitch, and I think also to a large extent a fear of failure. They don't want to be rejected. So I think these are all very deep down social issues which need to be corrected over time.
Thank you so much for that. Just bringing in Hari at this point, as I introduced a little while ago, Mr. Hari Menon is the Director, India Country Office of the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. This is obviously a challenging time for anyone who's working at grassroots empowerment of women, and I know that the Gates Foundation has been focusing on that. Would you give us an idea, Hari, of what the challenge is on the ground and how much, and very interestingly, both of our speakers talked about financial empowerment and financial independence as being the route really to empowering women altogether. What role can entrepreneurship play on the ground at the grassroots in India?
For sure. Thanks a lot, Faye. And before I get into my response, I do want to say it's a privilege for me to be on this panel with three inspiring, powerful women. I mean, my wife wears Anita's clothes. I have friends who work at Soumya's firm, and Faye, I get so much of my news and views on what's going on in the world from you. So it's great to be the one man on this panel. So thanks. And in response to your question, I'd say the situation on the ground is it's not great. I mean, I think Soumya and Anita both talked of the inequalities that exist on the ground, and the fact that in the 21st century there's really no place on earth that treats men and women equally is something we collectively need to be ashamed of, but especially men, I'd say. And for us to focus on gender equality, and under gender equality, women's economic empowerment has really come from the realization that, frankly, empowering women and giving them access, control, and agency in economic development is the best way for societies to progress. And there's enough data that tells you that. So, there is a social justice argument for gender equality. There's also just the cold, hard data that it is really the best thing that societies can do. So our work really is focused on some of the elements you mentioned. We feel getting women in positions where they have more access to resources, income, assets, making sure that they have the opportunity to control how those resources are deployed and then to benefit from the economic gains, and then giving them the agency, which is really about decision making and empowerment. That helps improve outcomes for families, for societies. Now in India, I think during COVID, we've seen obviously a lot of grim news. You referred to some of that yourself, in terms of the economic loss that has disproportionately affected women. The fact that gender-based violence has also increased from families being cooped up at home. But there have also been stories of resilience. And I think the stories of resilience have really come from the women's self-help groups and collective efforts across India. I mean, India has been seeing a growth of the SHG movement, and such group-based structures offer a lot of promise for what can be done to advance women's economic empowerment in a meaningful way. So for example, with the SHG movement across India, we've seen that about 10% of the 70 million women that are part of SHG movements, they have gotten into various off-farm, non-farm related small, micro, nano enterprises. And those kind of enterprises have the potential to start generating jobs for smaller number of, for maybe small number of women at this point. But the idea is that, even 10% of those enterprises and 10% of those enterprises turning into job generating opportunities can, generate millions of jobs. And those kinds of, grassroots entrepreneurs are what we need more of. If we are to have equitable development, that's the direction to go. And there are, green shoots on the ground, through programs that many NGOs do, programs supported by the government under the NRLM, and now, increasingly even in the urban space, supported by the World Bank and others. So, that's one big area where at the grassroots, we are seeing action. Another linked one is around farmer producer organizations. And the fact is, India still has a lot more value that can be created in agriculture. And because women are, in many cases, the most active participants in farming, there is an opportunity to make FPOs much more gender intentional and create opportunities for women to benefit from the jobs and the opportunities that be created. Even during the lockdown, there are stories from the ground of women-led groups, generating tens of crores of revenue from just getting into delivery of fruits and vegetables using, web-based tools. And, the fact that the digital divide is there in India is reality, but, we are also bridging it relatively fast. So I think there are several opportunities here, and, with more gender intentional policy, with looking at ways to support women's enterprises by preferential procurement, integrating them into supply chains, and then very purposefully addressing barriers that prevent women's participation in micro enterprises. For instance, universalizing childcare, taking a gender sensitive approach to transportation and mobility. All of these are ways that we can actually advance women's economic empowerment. And frankly, at this point in our trajectory as a country, that's really the most important thing for us to do.
That's actually very well said. And of course, at this point, there is the message about the Uttams Stree campaign. Now, we know that EdelGive Foundation has launched this campaign. It's called the Uttams Stree campaign. It aims to empower women by accelerating entrepreneurship in India and bringing forward stories of change with existing women who are entrepreneurs, economic and social challenges that they have faced, and to work towards creating a conducive ecosystem for women to start businesses and thrive. The campaign itself, sort of draws from the spirit of strong, successful, and capable women who have defied what tradition expects them to do, and have completely broken the mold. So through this national campaign, the EdelGive Foundation envisions to empower entrepreneurship among women to enable them to play a lead role in the next phase of India's growth story by creating a collaborative engagement with government, private sector stakeholders, awareness generation on existing status of women entrepreneurs, barriers, and knowledge to create an inclusive narrative. I don't have too much time. I know that most of the guests have to sort of get back to other things at 8 o'clock. A quick question to Anita ji. You've worked a lot, and I'm just picking up from the last thing that was said about grassroots. You work a lot with artists who are in rural India. This is obviously the challenges right now is not something people can do on their own. You need government, you need private sector, you need individuals to work together. What do you think needs to be done on the ground? What opportunities should we provide in order to truly bring in change?
I loved what Soumya just said, and I think that's one of our blocks is financial literacy. I completely resonated with that. It was a mind block for me. I've seen it as a mind block for many women entrepreneurs because we understand ideas of businesses, but somehow finances frighten us.
Yes.
So, they frighten me. It was a learning for me. It was very strange. I used to excel in maths in school. I used to get in my 90s. And then when I became a designer, I did my designing and I was a commerce graduate, but somehow the creative side in me let that mathematical side in me kind of, just be rusted. And then I took it upon myself and I said, no, I'm not going to let numbers faze me. I'm not going to do that. So I make a great effort now to understand numbers. And I think numbers frighten women. And I think at one level, all of us, we have dreams, but at some point, I think social conditioning has taught us that you should not be ambitious. It's unfeminine to be ambitious. I think those mindsets, besides, of course, you need to go out there and tell women that you can do what you can dream of doing and you are capable of doing it, and it's okay to be ambitious and it's okay to dream big, and I think empower them with financial literacy, empower them with tools. They need that support because it's difficult. It's very, very difficult for a woman. So support groups maybe. Like I love what Seva does, which is the organization by Ela Bhatt, which is, they encourage entrepreneurship. So I just think we need lots more organizations like this at the grassroots level to help with loans, help with finances, just help even with, giving them that Atmavishwas that you can do it, that you can do it. So it's a great support system is what's needed.
Yes. And in fact, I'm just going to quickly ask Soumya also, is there a hack for women who are watching who suddenly, and this is the tricky part, right? The Excel sheet that goes up on the projector and you're looking at all these numbers and they start to dance across the screen. The challenge is being able to see the numbers and see the story that they're telling and be able to shuffle the numbers around and change the story. Whether you're in a pitch or you're in your quarterly or you're before your board, how do we learn to do that?
And I think there is, I think, a fairly big role that educational institutions will have to play here, Faye, because I think it has to start much earlier than for women to become entrepreneurs and then try to figure out the finance side of it. The fact that we need educational institutions to teach and support and help women, particularly, whether it's developing courses for women as entrepreneurs or taking them through courses specifically in finance, those are all going to be critical. So to a large extent, microfinance institutions should also promote this. Grassroots organizations need to promote this. You need to have the local support for it, because I think if we think that it's going to happen through big bang efforts, I don't think so. It's really much more local. It's much more specific to what can banks do, what can microfinance institutions do, what can educational institutions do, what can media do to a large extent as well, in order to promote some of these basic concepts. So and really to keep reiterating that you don't need to be afraid of financial matters. It is, one part of it is just the financial independence itself, which should give you the confidence. The other is, how do you bring in the literacy and be open to learning at every stage? And I think women, quite honestly, are ambitious. They do want to scale their businesses. They do want to grow. They do want to be empowered. It's just that there are multiple stakeholders who are going to have to come into this to make that all possible. But I would just say, don't be afraid of the numbers.
And finally, in closing statements, obviously, don't be afraid of the numbers. But is there a piece of advice you want to hand out, Hari? Reach out and ask for help, because a lot of times women are nervous about just, I found this happen in all workspaces, right? Men are not shy about saying, hey, I don't know this. Can you just help me out? But women will sort of be embarrassed of accepting that we don't know. Instead, we won't put up our hands at all. And this is across the board. And if women from different stratas of society will just back into the corner that they came from, saying that, I'd rather stay here where it is safe than embarrass myself in front of people and fail in front of people. Is there a word of advice for women, Hari?
So, Faye, I'm going to cheat a little and not offer any advice to women. I don't think I'm well positioned to do that. But I am actually going to offer a word of advice to, other philanthropists and donors, everyone who's interested in, helping solve this problem. I mean, this is the biggest problem facing not just our country, but the world. There's an internal line that we use at the foundation that equal is greater, because a gender equal world is actually better for everyone, not just for women and girls. And this is going to require a massive collective effort. It's going to require, collaboratives of the sort EdelGive have set up, but we'll need many more of these. So I think there needs to be, networks that brings together the expertise of different organizations, entrepreneurs, women entrepreneurs like Anita ji, Soumya, and figure out ways for us to, get to the grassroots. Because I agree with Soumya, the change has to start there. India's too large a country and too diverse for us to, design top-down solutions. So I think there needs to be a lot more collaborative effort. So my advice to, my peers in the sector is, it's time for us to join hands with all of you, with partners like EdelGive, to make sure that the coming decade is one where we, offer a lot more opportunity for the women and girls of India.
All right. Well, I know when we've run out of time, and we have run out of time. Obviously, as it has been pointed out in the past, equal is not just better, equal is excellent. And until we have an equal number of women and trans people in rooms where decisions are being taken, whether those are boardrooms, whether they're, parliament, state assemblies, whether they're banks where decisions are being made, we have to have more women in rooms where decisions are being made, and that's how those decisions then empower more women. When we have women like Soumya and Anita ji making decisions, they set examples for women within their organizations and women who are watching them from outside as well. They create systems that are more equitable, opportunities that are more equitable, pay that's more equal, thereby empowering women within their households also. Because when you have a strong job, you're not the one who's going to quit that job when push comes to shove and there's a child that needs to be taken care of. Empowered through strong jobs, equal pay, equal voice is what we're looking for. And hopefully through endeavors like what EdelGive is doing, through the Gates Foundation and through amazing women who are role models, we're going to get closer and closer to doing that. I'm going to hand this back to the fine people at EdelGive. We are out of time, and I want to thank my panelists for being very generous with your time and being very indulgent with the questions. Thank you.
Thanks.